Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And yeah, my company, UltraSafe Nuclear, is based in Seattle. I'm coming to you today from my home in Montreal, Canada, which is where I'm involved in a lot of the work in building that bridge between the potential of nuclear energy as a decarbonization technology and the mining industry. We obviously have a lot of remote mines here in Canada, and it's certainly a place where there's a lot of potential. So I'll share my screen. I'm going to walk through a presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions at the end. I just need to find my way to PowerPoint. There it is. Okay, is that working? Is everybody able to see my screen?
Yep, that's fine.
It's good. Yeah, it's great. Okay, good. So title page, but it actually it's an interesting depiction of a micro modular reactor. This is UltraSafe Nuclear's 15 megawatt thermal reactor, which is enough energy to produce about 5 megawatts of electricity. So the vessel that you see here is about the size of a tanker truck. So in a way, we often call it a nuclear battery, because you would put in as many as you may need to deliver the energy requirements of the application. And I'll get into how this reactor works in just a few in a few slides. So just to give some context as to where I'm coming from, and I'm not here to give a sales pitch or anything, but just for the context, UltraSafe Nuclear, it was founded about 10 years ago. It runs on equity investment. We've raised over about $150 million to date. Seattle-based, operating globally. We have offices in Canada, the UK, South Africa, even Australia, where they're not currently nuclear yet. We're partnered with Ontario Power Generation, which is a Canadian utility that operates large-scale nuclear plants in Canada. So that brings the capability to actually operate and get a nuclear plant licensed here in Canada. The MMR, Micro Modular Reactor, specifically developed for remote mines and communities. So what that means is it's not intended to be a grid scale powering a city of 1 million people. It's really looking at powering in the smaller range of capacities that would be, a typical mine or a community of, say a few thousand people or more. Small modular reactors have been in the news a lot. You hear a lot about them. There's many different technologies. They're at different stages of development in terms of when they'll be deployed, and they're different sizes. So an SMR typically is a reactor that can help produce up to about 300 megawatts of electricity. And the smaller ones, which we're calling micro modular reactor or very small modular reactor, is in the range of less than 50 megawatts electrical capacity. Fourth generation. Now, what does that mean compared to traditional nuclear technology? So the paradigm shift in nuclear technology today is around passive safety versus active safety, and it's around the modularization and repeatability of design. So projects are not each a one-off, and I'll get into the safety case in a few slides. A little bit about Canada and SMRs. Canada has a federal SMR action plan, which is designed to promote the development, deployment, commercialization of SMRs in Canada. So it has the support of the federal government. It has enabling partners from across the country. 4 of our provinces have an MOU to collaborate in deploying SMRs in those regions. And it also includes an Indigenous Advisory Council. Here in Canada, any project you want to build pretty much anywhere in the country requires engagement and meaningful consultations with the Indigenous communities that are in the region of the project. And anybody who's done a mining project in Canada or elsewhere would be familiar with that. In the UK, Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy program, the UK government's providing up to £2.5 million in innovation funding to support development and demonstration of a high-temperature gas reactor technology in the UK. There's a couple of different streams. There's a grid-scale stream and there's a micro stream. We're in the micro stream, and we were selected to deliver. It says pre-feed, but it's probably more of a pre-feasibility study on our HTGR to support the government's target of net zero by 2050. That project now is in design. The design of the reactor is a bit of a larger scale reactor than the one I've been talking about for mines, and that will help meet some industrial needs in terms of process heat and potentially grid scale electrical generation, as well as a demonstration of hydrogen and sustainable aviation fuel production. Keeping in mind that a nuclear reactor generates heat, not electricity. So you could use it to make electricity, but you can use it for a number of other things as well, including clean hydrogen and other fuels. There's 2 potential sites for construction of the demonstration that have been identified, not public yet, but that will come in due course to build these demonstration plants in the UK. So how does the MMR work? So it's a high temperature gas cooled reactor. What that means is it doesn't use water to cool the reactor core. It uses helium. The fact that it doesn't use water means that you don't need to be beside a large water body like you may be accustomed to seeing with larger scale nuclear plants that rely on high volumes of water for cooling. The helium removes the heat from the reactor core. It's transferred to a molten salt. It's essentially a solar salt. And then that heat is passed over the invisible fence, I'll say, to molten salt storage. And then that molten salt can be used to generate steam, to generate the electricity, and then the loop returns again. That line in the middle, it's an important one, because what that does is it disconnects your conventional adjacent power generating plant from the nuclear footprint. So the idea is to keep the nuclear footprint as small as possible from a regulatory perspective, such that you don't have the additional cost of the extremely stringent design requirements for nuclear plants, and you can stick with kind of off-the-shelf conventional steam turbines and so on to generate your power. This is a depiction of a 2-unit micro-modular reactor facility with power generation and diesel backup and air-cooled condensing. On the left, again, this is the imaginary fence between the nuclear island and the adjacent plant. And these 2 buildings here, those are the nuclear citadels. So each one of those would house a reactor. The reactor is actually subsurface. The reason why it's subsurface is security. Knowing that you could have dozens or hundreds of small modular reactors deployed across the country, security is at top of mind for communities and regulators, and this is designed to withstand an aircraft impact. So that's the reason why it's underground. As for the building on top of it, this footprint is about the size of a squash court, so it's a very small footprint. British squash court or American squash court, I'm not sure, but you get the idea. Comparison and renewables, and we don't see nuclear being in competition with renewables. My view is that we need to use every tool we have in the box to battle climate change and decarbonize mining operations. The challenge is, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. That's particularly true in Canada's Arctic. And battery storage can only get you so far. So when you're looking at reliable baseload, say above 10 megawatts even, or even above 5, you start to have a lot of land use, a lot of materials use, economically impractical, battery storage requirements and so on. And this really here is just to depict the energy density of nuclear fuel is such that you can have a very small footprint while delivering a reliable baseload. Hybrid energy systems is a great way to go for applications that have peaks and valleys in terms of energy demand. And I'm not aware of any mine that has a consistent demand day in and day out. So it's important to be able to follow the load. By incorporating a modular nuclear reactor with hybrid energy systems and battery storage combined with the molten salt storage and the variability in the reactor itself, you have a high degree of flexibility in meeting your energy demands throughout the life of the mine. Talk a little bit about fuel because this ties into the safety. Now, many of you may have seen the metallic bundles of uranium fuel that CANDU and other reactors use. Fourth generation nuclear is mostly predicated on what's called triazole fuel. That is a small kernel about the size of a poppy seed of enriched uranium. That enriched uranium is coated in several layers of materials that are intended to contain the products of the fission. The two main dangerous things about nuclear fuel is the radiation, obviously, but the particles as well that can contaminate the environment around the reactor and around the plant. That's the reason why these fuel particles are coated like this. So we go a step further. We take those tiny particles and we encapsulate them in a ceramic silica carbide matrix, almost like encasing these in a diamond. So in the event you have a failure of the kernel itself, you have a very robust layer of protection that prevents environmental contamination. It also, and with the design of the reactor core, it keeps the power density to a point where it cannot overheat to the point of causing damage like a meltdown. And that is where the term passive safety comes in. The whole purpose is to have the safety of the reactor governed by the laws of nature rather than governed by operator intervention. So in the event you have a cooling failure, essentially what happens is the reactor core will reach a stable temperature that is well within the safety limits of the reactor itself, and essentially it shuts itself down and just stays at that temperature until an operator can take action. But it doesn't pose any danger to the facility itself or the surroundings. The reactor comes pre-fueled. It runs for 20 years without having to refuel. In that 20 years, a single reactor core is equivalent to 200 million liters of diesel and over 500,000 tons of carbon emissions. So, and you're talking about a volume of fuel that's maybe 1 meter cubed. So, this would almost fit in a refrigerator versus 200 million liters of diesel. So again, the power density is such that the displacement of fossil fuels and carbon is quite large. What happens at the end of the life? So the equipment itself, like any piece of equipment, it has a design life. The design life of the reactor itself is 40 years, so you could refuel it and run it for another 20-year cycle, or it gets decommissioned, or maybe you're at the end of the mine life and so on. So the fuel module is removed from the reactor. It's stored for a cool down period in a cask, which is how fuel is stored in many parts of the world now. And then it's removed. Here in Canada, it would become part of the Nuclear Waste Management Organization's Deep Geological Repository. I'm not entirely sure what the plans are in the United Kingdom, but I know that countries are looking at various different ways of long-term storage of spent nuclear fuel. One of the things that's common amongst almost all regulators in nuclear countries is that you have to have a waste management plan and a decommissioning plan in place, approved by the regulator and funded as a prerequisite to licensing, meaning that if you don't have the back end planned, you don't have a shovel in the ground at the first at the front end. And this is a Canadian-centric presentation. I apologize for that, but most of the regulators collaborate, and they're all quite similar in terms of requirements. In Canada, there's 5 phases: site preparation, license to construct, license to operate, decommissioning, and site abandonment. Our demonstration project with Ontario Power Generation is the only project in Canada to be in formal licensing. We're in the license to prepare site stage. The successful license will be issued after the environmental assessment is approved by the regulator, other aspects of the project, and that is getting submitted at the end of this year. License to construct end of next year, and that would put construction starting in 2024. And then we're looking at operations of the reactor by 2026. So this is a reactor that is on track to be deployed within the 2020s. A little bit on the levelized cost of energy. And again, we're comparing this to diesel because we're really looking at remote mine sites that depend on diesel for power generation. The 3 lines here, the orange one on the left represents a 20 megawatt operation, which would be 4 reactor units. The middle one is 10, which would be 2 units, and then compared to diesel power. You know, a year ago, I would have said that nuclear, small-scale nuclear is competitive with diesel, but with the current state of fossil fuel prices and potential carbon taxes and global politics and everything else, you know, we are in a situation where the model indicates that not only are you going to decarbonize, you're going to save money while you're doing it, and you're going to de-risk your operating costs because you'll have a long-term outlook on your energy costs. The commercial model, there's 2 things that I believe is true when it comes to mining companies. The first is that they want to be first to be second, not necessarily the first in terms of a new application of technology like this one. So there's a lot of eyes on the demonstration project that's happening in Canada. The other one is that most mining companies aren't interested in having a nuclear reactor on their balance sheet. So the commercial model we see emerging is one whereby a special purpose vehicle would be formed with a nuclear capable technology company, a nuclear operator. Depending where you are in the world, you may have an indigenous development corporation take an equity position, and any special interest equity investors that may want to be a part of it. And then you develop a power purchase agreement, and the mine is able to purchase that power without having the liability and the regulatory responsibility of the nuclear plant and its eventual decommissioning. So the Global First Power MMR project at Chalk River. Chalk River is a Canadian nuclear laboratory site that is a couple of hours west of Ottawa, Canada. It's a 50 or 60-year-old research site that has a program to site Canada's first small modular reactor. Ours is the one that is at the forefront. Right now it's a parking lot, and we're doing some geotechnical work and other preparations, just as you may do for a mine, but in this case we're in a bit of a different environment. I already mentioned we are in licensing. Global First Power is the name of our partnership with Ontario Power Generation, and the notion is to build, own, and operate the plant. It's not a pilot plant. This is not something where we're seeing if it works and then scaling it up. This is the commercial design that would be deployed into the field. The reason for that is in repeatability of design. So we're going through the regulatory process now, and when we get to another project, say at a mine site, the regulatory process then becomes more around the site-specific conditions rather than the technology itself, because the technology itself will have already been through the regulatory process. So it's not a rubber stamp, but the hope is that it makes it more efficient to license a nuclear plant, because historically that's a very, very long process, 10 years plus. And that's a little longer than it takes for a lot of mines to be built and become operational. So we need to make sure those timelines line up. In summary, why SMRs for remote mining? Greenhouse gas free, doesn't use water. You don't need to be on a grid. It's really deployable anywhere. Reduces reliance and logistical risk of diesel generated power. That's environmental risk, it's cost risk, it's storage risk with tank farms, and so on. It brings opportunities to change the paradigm for Indigenous communities that are in the areas of the mine, because there's the potential for energy to also help the communities get off of diesel generation as well when they're nearby the mine. It can be a mutually beneficial to have clean energy installed. Long-term tariff stability. You could use the heat not only for electricity, but you could use it to generate hydrogen on site. You could use waste heat for shaft heating. There's really a whole host of ways that you can decarbonize a mine site almost completely. And the modular approach reduces site construction activity. It's a fairly rapid construction schedule, under 6 months, with the modules being fabricated off-site, and can be harmonized with renewables. I'm happy to share this presentation. It's got some links with some more information. And that's it.